Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
To go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, to have discontinuous thought processes, as opposed to when we used to be a reading-based culture and we used to read a book, we used to have a systematic way of thinking, we used to be able to focus and concentrate on one idea for a long period of time. So the medium has changed our brains quite literally from the inside out, and therefore it changes our perception of the world.
It's no secret digital devices and technology are a big part of our lives, but unfortunately, they can present a variety of problems, especially for parents to solve when they get out of hand. Our guest today is Daniel C. He's an author, former pastor, a TEDx speaker, and the CEO of a productivity consulting group called Spacemakers. He's also an author of a book called Raising Tech Healthy Humans. He'll share some of the reasons why parents need to take back control and some keys to help achieve that. We'll discuss more about technology and parenting with our guest today, Daniel C., along with my wife Kate, and I'm Brett Ryan for Focus on the Family, Australia. Well, welcome to the program.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
I feel like I know you because I've seen you on videos, on TED videos, and I think there's over 350,000 views. So we've got a superstar in front of us at the moment.
I mean, I feel like I've met you as well. That's the thing about talking on Zoom, isn't it? But, you know, it's nice to meet you in the flesh and to see us 3D.
So for those who haven't had the privilege of meeting up with you, tell us the short version of who Daniel is and his family dynamics and a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so look, I am from Hobart and I've got 3 kids. I'm married. I've got a beautiful 16-year-old daughter just learning to drive, which is exciting. Scary. My wife is doing that, so she's the brave one. I've got a 14-year-old boy and a 12-year-old son. I live in community, so I bought land and I have 2 houses, so I share life with another family, and we've been doing that for 15 years.
Wow.
And so that's been an adventure. So yes, I used to be a physiotherapist. That was my first career, and ended up in management and leadership. Then I, felt called to be a pastor, and I worked as a pastor part-time for a decade, and then transitioned from physio to starting a business around productivity as well. And now I work full-time in Spacemakers, which is a productivity consulting organisation, mainly in Hobart and around Australia, but I've got a branch in Canada, and I've got books and I speak.
Wow.
Got a podcast, all that kind of stuff.
I'm exhausted already.
Me too.
Very exciting. That has been over a journey of a number of years, not in 1 year.
Fair enough. So you have written this book, and let's unpack what it is about, raising tech healthy kids. Why do we need to talk about this?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because I don't see myself as a parenting expert, which is funny to write a parenting book. I say I'm an engaged parent who's muddling my way through like all of us, and I've learnt some things along the way. But I spent 7 years reading and researching about technology generally because my first book, Spacemaker, is about how to make space in a world of digital overuse. By thinking about, as adults, how we're using technology and why we're struggling so much with spending so much time online. And a lot of that research is based on kids and teens as well as adults, because there's not so much in the adult space.
That may be for another conversation, I think.
Might be for another conversation. And so I speak at conferences, I speak in different places around Australia around making space from digital overuse for adults and professionals. And the number one question that adults ask me in the Q&A is, how do I help my kids? Which is interesting because I'm talking to adults about their behaviours, and yet we can't see outside of our own kids.
Well, that happens with Kate and I. We get a lot of people say, how do I get the kids off their technology? And it's a common question. So I imagine many parents, grandparents and guardians right now are leaning in to the guru of how we actually do this.
Well, so it's tricky, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry. It's tricky because as adults, we didn't necessarily grow up in a tech age. We've just had to learn it. Whereas our children are growing up in this technological age where they're given it, basically handed a phone or whatever when they're sitting in a pram.
Absolutely. It's a very different thing. So on the one hand, digital overuse is the same for all of us, whether you're adults or children. There is an impact in being online all the time and how it impacts our brain, our heart, our habits. But there is something very distinct about children and actually children at different ages.
Yes.
And I'm just really passionate about helping raise healthy humans, which is why the book's called Tech Healthy Humans, Raising Tech Healthy Humans. It's about our humanity and our wholeness and how we can use technology but not allow it to become the gravitational center of all we do.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Fantastic.
if the young people are listening to this and they say, well, this is just, we're digital natives. This is what we've been brought up with, as Kate said. But they really are so connected to it that if you take the technology away, it's like you're taking away oxygen or chopping off their left arm. It is so significant when you see some of the reactions that people have because of the addictive nature. But let's go back before that. You're saying you want to get raising healthy humans. So starting earlier is the key, isn't that correct?
Well, yeah. So firstly, my book and my speaking and teaching is predominantly for helping parents set up their kids with great tech habits. So I speak to parents with very young kids, babies, toddlers, but also, primary school. I generally don't speak to high schools or, focusing kind of in the post-high school age. But I think there's so much we can do to set up our kids with great tech habits. And one of the first principles I have in my book, so I have a few principles and then I have the practices. The founding principle I have is raise adults, not children. So
Kate loves that.
I do. I love that. But they don't stay children. You're trying to develop them.
Well, it's true. Like, we're not trying to raise children. We're trying to raise adults. And the first time I heard that expression was through my close friend, Mick. And we had our first baby and we were in the hospital. And he just made an offhanded remark. He said, don't forget that your role is to raise an adult.
That's right.
And it really stuck with me, particularly maybe being a productivity consultant, because Stephen Covey, who's a productivity guru from the 90s, said, start with the end in mind. So in a business sense, whenever we try to make decisions about how we lead from a productivity perspective, we're thinking about our end goal and then working backwards. And so it kind of resonated with me, the idea of, the end goal is to raise a healthy, wholehearted, faith-filled, loving human who has the resilience and autonomy to live their own life without me. And God has blessed me with children for this time, but I don't own them. You know what I mean? And my role is to help partner with God in this process.
And the Bible reflects about that when it talks about in Proverbs. Train up a child in the way that they should go. It's actually training them up in the way that they should go, the future, that the way we want to have them, in the way that they're hardwired. And so to hear that, it's like music to our ears.
Oh, absolutely. We have a job to do. I think sometimes we can fall into the day-to-day just routine, but setting the goal of the end game. What is the end game? Productive, serving, loving human beings. And, those with a faith to love God and love others. That really covers a lot of things.
Yeah. So that really changes how we approach almost everything as parents, if that's our perspective.
That's right.
Because if we're thinking about how might we raise loving, healthy adults, well then, if your children don't want to eat their vegetables, well, it's easier not to fight that fight and give them ice cream for dinner. But of course, we know that that's not going to be a good long-term solution as they become healthy adults, because you want to give them a healthy diet and healthy habits around food.
Yeah.
It's the same with sleep. If they don't want to go to sleep, they don't want a routine, well, there comes a point where it's like, well, I know that you don't want to go to sleep, but to create a healthy routine of sleeping and resting, it's good for your mental health. It's good for our sanity.
Our brain needs it.
Our brain needs it. It'll set you up to be a healthier adult. And the same is true for technology. Whenever we think about the technology choices we give our kids, let's not just think about what the newest thing is or what the kids around them are doing. Let's think about what might be the impact or consequences on their lives positively or negatively as they grow up, and how can we make choices beginning with the end in mind.
Yes.
So what I'm not saying is that we should get rid of the playfulness and fun and joy and frivolity of childhood. I'm not saying give them adult responsibilities before their time, but I'm just saying that as we make those everyday choices, think about the longer-term consequences on their character, their faith, and their personhood.
Oh, that's right. Well, we often speak about when you're setting boundaries in your home, you make them around character development. Don't make rules for the sake of making rules. So the same is around tech. And we've often spoken about we didn't have tech in our home when our boys were growing up. And we often had a lot of backlash with people saying, oh, you're holding them back. Our eldest son ended up as a data analyst writing algorithms.
Yeah.
So, it made me laugh because we set rules in our home around relationship and character and development. And that was before it was, back in the day.
Yeah, you're so old, Kate.
I know.
Yeah,
when I
you're
look
so
back,
old.
he's about to turn 30. Just saying. But there was tech around, and we discussed it with them, though. We didn't make calls without them.
Yeah.
We explained the why.
Yeah, so it's relational.
Yes.
I agree with you about character development and that you won't hold your kids back if you slow down with tech. In fact, one of my second key principle, if that's all right.
Yes.
And we didn't plan this.
No.
But the second key principle, I call it a healthy brain first. Now, I'm looking at it from a science perspective rather than a character and faith perspective, because the book is for a broader audience. But when I look at what happens with younger developing brains, my not just hypothesis, what I see based on the research is if you give kids highly addictive, interactive technologies at too young an age, because you want them to be good at tech, you don't want them to miss out, it's likely that they'll actually fracture their attention, they'll lose their concentration, they'll reduce their ability to have meaningful interactions with humans, and they'll have less focus to think their own thoughts and to have the ability to have self-control and mood regulation, which are all the things that will not make them good at tech in the tech field as adults. The opposite is true if you slow down with tech and give them a range of non-tech experiences and a healthy brain first when they're young. When you give them tech, let's say, in a higher quantity with higher addictive natures in high school and beyond, you'll set them up to be much better at tech longer term.
Yeah.
Cal Newport, a computer professor in America who wrote Deep Work, he says the same thing. He says that giving kids iPads in school and saying that's going to help them with technology is like giving kids Tonka toy trucks and saying it will equip them to be auto mechanics. It just doesn't match up.
No.
Yeah.
And that is very true. I mean, many grandparent would say, oh, well, I don't know what to do. I'll ask my 2-year-old grandchild to know how to do things. And it's sad that, a 2-year-old knows how to do those things. And we've done it with our grandchildren, and they know how to swipe. They know how to do recordings now. And I'm thinking, man, they are completely immersed, and how easy it is to use technology as babysitters or a dummy.
But my challenge here is all they know how to do is use consumer devices. So there's a big difference in knowing how to use a consumer-facing screen, so swipe on YouTube, do some basic editing, use Minecraft or use PowerPoint. That kind of stuff's pretty simple. What they won't have a clue about is how to actually develop the types of products that they're using, which is where the real money is, right? And it's where the jobs are in the long term, actually knowing technology at a deep level. So the fact that I have a lot of parents say to me, I'm amazed that I see my 1 or 2-year-old and look at how clever they are. I can't imagine what they can do, right? And my point I say to parents is actually because your 2-year-old can navigate an iPhone doesn't make them brilliant. It actually says that the iPhone is designed for 2-year-olds. Like it's designed with 2-year-old simplicity and it's not equipping them for high tech because it's a consumer-based device that's very, very simple. Does that make sense?
It absolutely is. And I think too, if we give our children the love of learning, then they're going to learn anything that's put in front of them in the way that they're wired in the future. So that's what we said about, I was a teacher. So you're speaking to the the choir about that. And it's really important that the parents' role is to give our child a vast amount of opportunities to learn in different ways, not just one, because they think that's the way it's going and AI, et cetera, et cetera. Don't get me started. Whereas they don't teach them the emotional intelligence, relating to people, studying all out in nature and all those things that we will talk about, the importance of that.
And there is so much more to talk about, but we're going to have a little bit of a time out for a moment. We're speaking with Daniel C., our guest today for Focus on the Family, Australia.
The Word for Today is Australia's most widely read daily devotional, designed to give you practical teaching to keep you focused on your relationship with Jesus. Read it online or subscribe to the free printed edition at thewordfortoday.com.au.
Welcome back. We're speaking to Daniel C. He's the author of Raising Tech-Healthy Humans, and you're listening to Focus on the Family, Australia. Well, before the break, we spoke about the 2 principles, and there's a 3rd principle. So what's the 3rd principle when it comes to raising tech-healthy humans?
Yeah, so the 3rd principle, it was a broad concept around screen time, screen content, and screen context, really helping parents think about the types of principles that help them make decisions, particularly around interactive media. So how much screen time should they have, but not just that, what's the content they're watching, but the main focus that I I spend time on is the context. So the types of devices they're using
okay.
and the impact of the medium on the message, I suppose.
So what do you mean about context? What's context?
Yeah, so context is about the actual, well, I'd say the environment that we're putting our kids in. So from a technological point of view, it's the devices or the app environments, the social media environments that they're using, as opposed to the content that they're consuming on those devices. So, for example, you might be on social media and you might be looking at, obviously inappropriate content, but even if you're looking at appropriate content, the very fact that you're using short scroll videos and you're flipping context and you're seeing lots of shiny, bright lights and rapidly changing discussions on videos, the context of that will have almost more of an impact on your brain than the content. There's a lot of argument right now in America about social media and Facebook and Meta and different companies and what they're doing to children and their brains and their mental health. But the big argument that's really not being understood is it doesn't matter, even if Facebook filters all inappropriate, let's say suicide-related content, kids will still end up anxious with low self-esteem, body image, because the medium of social media in itself is fundamentally broken.
Right.
Now, that might be hard to explain. Let me take it outside of tech. It might be easier. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember... So Winston Churchill, I don't remember, I'm not that old. Winston Churchill once said, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. And he said that after the Blitz bombing in Nazi Germany, I think 1943, and the Chamber of Commons, the British Parliament was bombed, and they were trying to wrestle with, do they rebuild it using the original design, which was a rectangular structure, which is a rectangular structure, or do they go circle? And so Winston Churchill argued that if we change it from a rectangle to a circle, then we lose our two-party preferred system because the rectangle creates an imagination within us. There's an idea embedded in it that there's two parties and they face each other and they play off each other. Now, whether or not that's a good system for democracy, that's not the point. The point is that the building and the environment shapes our imagination.
Yeah.
Later on, a guy called McLuhan said that the medium is the message and that we shape our technologies and then they shape us. And that's very, very important, I think, for us to actually grasp. So what it means is the ideas that are embedded in a particular device or app shape us, I would say, even more than the content that we're consuming.
Yeah.
An iPhone is built on one big fundamental idea that you can multitask many things all at the same time.
Yeah.
It has everything into one thing. And therefore, when we use an iPhone on a regular basis, we start to multitask, which our brains can't do. So we start to lose our ability to focus on books.
There'd be many people saying, I can do it. And and our son did the same thing when he was studying and watching the NBA and listening to music and also wanting to find out a little bit about what he was studying all at the same time.
So you described exactly what I'm saying, though.
Yeah.
So that would be multitasking, meaning we are moving very rapidly from one attention-rich context to the next, but we can't concentrate on anything.
That's because we keep breaking.
Because we keep breaking it. Because the medium is training us to go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, to have discontinuous thought processes, as opposed to when we used to be a reading-based culture and we used to read a book, we used to have a systematic way of thinking, we used to be able to focus and concentrate on one idea for a long period of time.
Yes.
So the medium has changed our brains quite literally from the inside out, and therefore it changes our perception of the world.
So when we talk about, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is a good report, that's more content, but the context is how we, take every thought under captivity, how we're consuming all these things and the medium that we're actually consuming and the context you were referring to.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. It's almost like there's this invisible force of ideas that shape us, and if we're not aware of those ideas, then we're influenced without knowing it. And a lot of the devices and apps are produced on ideas that we haven't even thought about deeply. A classic is Twitter, or now called X, I think, or Z, I can't remember.
Formerly known.
But Twitter is basically the idea that you can communicate stuff in sound bites. And then, surprise, surprise, when you use Twitter a lot, you end up arguing and yelling at each other in sound bites, which leads to polarization in politics and opinions.
Or headlines.
Headlines, right? And you start thinking in headlines and you start losing your ability for nuanced dialogue and argument because the idea in Twitter shaped us. The idea in Instagram is that it's very bodily based, that you can perceive and understand the world through an image. Therefore, when you use Instagram regularly, no matter whether you're looking at good content or bad content, you start to see the world according to your body image, and you start to see people rather than their character and character development. You start to see the world around them as in, how beautiful are you? what's your weight, what's your fitness, what do you wear, because the medium, the ideas in Instagram are shaping your fundamental view of the world. This happens with everything, and if we are unaware of it as parents, we might be very conscious about making sure kids watch appropriate content, but we're missing the very fact that they're watching 30-second videos on and off again and again for hours at a time is fundamentally going to impact their ability to concentrate and to have a brain that works longer term.
Now, I'm sure many parents are saying, I know what the problem is. I know what the problem is. We need to unpack these problems to know that this is the reason why we're talking about it. And so there is hope, everyone listening to this. We're going to do some solutions in a moment, but we want to just ground down this is the reason why we're speaking about this, because it's not just their minds they're controlling, it's also affecting them physiologically. We're seeing a higher level of obesity, and COVID actually resulted in, I've seen some studies that actually have significantly increased obesity just from that period of time. But we're also seeing it's affecting our vision. So unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so the myopia or nearsighted research is fascinating, interesting. And there was this amazing randomized control study that happened all across the world. It was called COVID-19. It was a pandemic. And what I mean by that is researchers had been studying eyesight in kids for a long, long time. And then all of a sudden, entire populations all around the world of kids started to learn online, and they spend a lot of time indoors more than outdoors compared to previous generations. And what researchers discovered is the amount of nearsightedness increased massively the younger the kids were. So I don't have the research right on me, so I'm going on memory. So forgive me if it's not 100% right, but I think 6-year-old kids who did 10 months of lockdown and online learning were 3 times more likely to develop myopia than the predecessors. I think 8-year-old kids were about 1.6 times more likely by memory, and then 10-year-old kids had no statistical difference. So what that shows again is the younger your brain and the younger your visual system, and they're very linked, the more influential the screens and behaviors that kids have are on their brains and their eyesight.
So all parents who are holding a baby right now or a toddler, pay attention.
Yeah. So the problem's not blue light. We understand that blue light impacts sleep. If you're on a screen too much, you can't sleep, which is true. But the problem is near work. That means if you hold an iPad or a phone, let's say 30 to 40 centimeters from the eyes, which is what we normally do, the eyes are essentially straining, because if we think about how our eyesight developed, I mean, I would never stare at a person 30 to 40 centimeters away, maybe my wife, but not for 5 hours at a time. That would be creepy. Yeah. Right? And so the eyes are not developed to actually look at something so close. Yeah. And so when we spend a lot of time with near work using handheld devices, our eyes struggle to develop, particularly young kids as they're developing, and particularly if parents are nearsighted or their kids are from an Asian origin, so Chinese backgrounds, because of the genetic increased risk of myopia. Right. So essentially, where possible, it's better to have your kids watch a screen further away.
Yeah, television.
Right. Yeah, it's better to watch a television than to have a handheld device, particularly if they're under 10 years old, so that their near work can be for education, but their far work is for entertainment.
Yeah.
The other big factor, and it is worth saying, is sunlight is more important than near or far work. So there is definitely a correlation between screen use and how close it is versus how far. But the number one thing that improves eyesight or reduces eyesight is not getting enough sunlight. And the problem with lockdown learning is it's indoors.
Oh, it's funny.
And it's on screens.
Having spoken to a number of schools and students and saying that, you should get out more. And they say, does that mean I can take my technology outside and I can do the same thing outside? And I said, no, that defeats the purpose.
Well, I mean, interestingly, I did speak to a world-leading ophthalmologist from Hawaii, and she did say, look, she agrees with you, Brett, but she said, if you had to, you're better off watching a screen outside because it helps your visual health. It won't help your mental health, but it'll help your visual health.
Fair enough.
We usually say an hour of green time for every hour of screen time.
Oh, I like it.
So that, they can't just sit and sit and sit.
Yeah.
And but they get out into nature for their health and vitamin D.
This has been absolutely fascinating, and I think we need to discuss it more because we obviously haven't covered all the solutions. Would you be happy to come back and we'll chat more about, raising technology happy humans?
That would be great. I'm sure we could talk for hours.
Our guest today has been Daniel C., author of Raising Tech Healthy Humans. To find out more about him, his books, his podcast, and to gain access to some online courses, you can go to raisinghumans.au. That's raisinghumans.au. For more resources and free videos on parenting children regarding technology and social media, go to families.org.au. And these are only made possible because of friends who have a heart for God-honouring families and relationships. Please consider partnering with us. On behalf of Kate and the rest of the team, I'm Brett Ryan, inviting you to tune in for part 2 of our conversation with Daniel for Focus on the Family, Australia.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.